As I get started, I'd like to thank the American Forage and Grassland Council and the State Council for giving me the opportunity to go participate in that, the Cattlemen's Association for allowing me to be here today. It's just a wonderful event. I was planning on coming anyway because Dalton and I are good friends, and then so yesterday, I guess it was, I was moving some cattle, trying to get everything back in track from getting back from Florida. And Chris called and he said, "Are you planning on coming to the meeting?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, would you like to speak?" And I said, "Well, I guess I can." So it's good to be here. Met Dan at the American and Forage Grassland Council meeting. Also, if you're here and you've never been to a grazing conference in the state, I strongly encourage you to go to that. I'd strongly encourage you to attend the meeting. Next year it's in Asheville, North Carolina. It's very beneficial. And if you pick up one thing from that conference, it could really change your operation. It's only by the grace of God that I am what I am, and I understand that. I didn't understand that for a long time, but thinking about purpose. You know, one time there was an individual, and he worked for the Olympics. And he'd go around and he'd try to find talent. And one day he's entering this small rural community that probably a lot of us live in. And as he's entering this community and he looks around at the landscape and he sees an arrow stuck in a tree right in the middle of a bullseye. Goes on down the road and there's a barn, arrow stuck right in the middle of a bullseye. Goes on down the road, bale of hay, arrow right in the middle of a bullseye. He goes on into town and he asks them, he said, "You know, what's the deal with all these arrows stuck in various things, and every one of them's right in the middle of a bullseye?" And they said, "Well, that's one guy locally." And they said, "What's his name?" They give the name, and they said, "Do you think I could meet him? You know, I'd be interested asking him if he'd like to be on our archery team." They said, "Sure." So he goes and he meets this guy, and as they're talking, he says, "You know, as I enter this town," he said, "all these arrows are, exactly in the middle of the bullseye. How did you get so good? Like, how did you practice or whatever? I'd like to have you on the Olympic team." He said, "Well, shucks." He said, "It ain't nothing." He said, "I just rear back and shoot, and wherever it hits, I draw the bullseye around it." And to say all that, when it comes to farming operations, whether it's across Kentucky or wherever else it may be, how many of us have ever just reared back and shot and didn't really have a bullseye in mind? Or there wasn't a purpose? Now, the purpose for each and every one of us on each and every farm could be a little bit different. The purpose for me, my wife, my parents, the purpose for me and my wife is that when my 5 and 2-year-old grandson grow up, if they want to come on that farm and work, it's not burdened by debt, it's functioning within God's blueprint, it is sustainable, and if diesel goes to $5 a gallon that I'll bring up in a minute, or 6 or 7, it's not that big a deal. It won't cripple. Also, the community dynamics of this industry, I think, is very important. You know, I was watching a video once of Ian Mitchell Enos, and he was talking about this community dynamic. I thought he was talking about Tompkinsville, or, you know, in our local community. Community is all of us. There are a whole lot of valuable resources out there for us to learn, to know better, or just to consider, why are we doing what we're doing? You know, for what purpose? I'm thankful that picture there was taken on August the 30th. Chris, he called and he'd been somewhere else, and he come by. And he'd come by the farm a few years earlier, and I'd ask him if he'd come by and look over and tell us what all we were doing wrong. And it took a good while, you know, but every field we would go into, he'd be like, I'd say, "What do we need to do here?" "I'd do some clover." We'd go to the next field. "What do we need to do here?" "Clover." Next field, clover. And then he said, what do what do you think about clover? And I said, well, I'm not real sure, and blah, blah, blah. And I said, my dad really likes it. He said, listen to your dad. I spoke 2 years ago, I believe it was, at Litchfield at just a grazing conference as a producer. It wasn't a spokesman contest or anything. And like today, at the end of this, you may have a question, you may not. At the end of my talk, when we took on questions, somebody asked from the audience, they said, do you unroll hay in feeding hay? And I said, we have in times past, but not much lately. And they said, why not? And I said, well, $5 a gallon diesel. And when I said that, diesel was high. And I thought that was somewhat a logical answer. A few weeks, maybe a month after that, this guy writes in some kind of magazine, periodical or something, an article. I'm reading through it, and you've probably read the same one. And you unroll a 5x5 roll of hay across your pasture, and you get the nutrient benefit of about $40 to $45 from that. One day I go to a farm, we had 30 cow-calf pairs and a bull there. So I got what I said at that conference. I still remember that. I read this article, and I had to read over it twice to be like, really? I go out there one day not really thinking anything about it. A tractor that's way too big to be unrolling hay. But when I shut that tractor off, and I wasn't really thinking nothing about it, but when you shut it off, it'd tell you how much fuel you burn from the time you cranked it to you shut it off. Right there's how many gallons I burned. So let's add 200s to that to be easy math, and I burn 1/4 gallon of fuel. My statement was $5 a gallon diesel. So I wasn't willing to spend $1.25 to get 45. That was humbling. Because when I dive into this purpose and trying to be more efficient on this farm, and I'm doing genomics, and I'm buying high quality bulls, and I'm looking at those EPDs, and all those are good and well. But I come to understand the first thing that I had to fix on the farm was the cheapest. It was me. It was me. That's humbling. When we can have that information in front of us, but what are you going to do with it? I can be like, I still don't believe that article. Chris Toich lied to me. We bought a farm, my wife and I, my parents, in August of 2023. We took it over like October. Had to put some fence on it, but that left-hand picture is a picture of that in February of 2024. And, okay, that right there is solid briars. This whole upper end, there's a good area there that was vines, briars, and I was telling Dan earlier, it took a long time to bush hog that the first time because they're limestone rock up out of the ground. So on that upper portion, I bush hogged a big percentage of that backing up because we have a lot of sinkholes back home. So I'd back up, I'd pull up, back up, pull up. Anyway, but on the right is July the 11th, as you can see, 24. I go in there, and because of coming to things like this, watching videos, and, there's fescue in that first picture, right? And now that part there it's pretty good. Now it's growed up there. But all these weeds over here, when we first took that over, and I'd put the cows in there, and before I would have been trying to figure out how I was going to kill all those weeds. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to say, I'd put those cows over there, let them graze that, and they'd come out of there, and they'd just look spectacular. And it really made me scratch my head. But the unrolling hay, so there's 77 cow-calf pairs in that group on the left. All right, you can see those weeds right there. I'd bush hog that twice that year. Okay, so those weeds are about this tall. I'd just go in there and I'd unroll 4 rows at a time. I just had fun with it because I knew what could happen. I'd unroll, I'd leave a 5-foot strip, unroll, and then I'd go back and I'd unroll again. And that whole thing, I just put all those weeds on the ground, and I'm like excited about what that's going to look like going forward. I talked to Chris once and I asked him, I said, are we better unrolling spring hay than we are fall? And he said, well, it don't really matter. And I said, well, you get the seed benefit of unrolling that seed or the spring hay in your pasture. And he said, well, your spring hay shouldn't have any seed in it. And I said, ours does. But anyway, should have and being on our farm is two different things. You know what it should be and it is. This is the day after Christmas. On that farm, that is broom sedge in there, there are 105 acres of pasture on that given. Every bit of that, this picture here, that was all in timber about 4.5 years ago. That got sowed like December of 2020. So December this next year will be 5 years. But another individual, Greg Brand, he come out and visited on the farm one day, and a lot of our cows were in 30 to 40 like cows pastures, and we had them sitting here, and he said if you'd put them together, it'd save you a lot of time and stuff. And the purpose that I had them split up, so me and my dad could go work those cattle, it not kill us, and go on. Well, my dad's health hadn't been the best, so I put those together, and I can go out and get somebody to come help on a weekend and may work these bigger groups, and it just instead of going checking 2 groups, you check 1. Right there is that's a bred heifer. Of course, you see her at the bottom, April 14th, 2021. That's ryegrass, and that's just in like a weaning lot. This same year in that particular field there is ryegrass, cereal rye, vetch, and crimson clover. The deers are loving it. That particular cow, she's 27G. You can't tell it on the tag, but I know who she is, and she's actually could be out of a Hereford bull that come from somebody that spoke today. But that animal, if we're going to be efficient and have animals that stay around, and I just went back and looked on my phone, like when our cows calve, as soon as they're born, I tag them. I put the dams number in the calf's ear. If it's a heifer, I tag her in the left ear. If it's a steer, I castrate it with a scalpel and put the tag in the right ear. That way, when they come through the chute, not to implant the heifer because we'll work from the left side of the animal, and the steer we can implant. But that heifer right there, she AI bred. So she calved in 2021 on 9/9. 2022, she calved 9/6. 2023, 9/4. And 2024, this year, she calved 9/11. And I don't have a picture of all of them, but I had a picture of her, and it worked out. So that's why I told you that. Here's a group of first calf heifers. Those are the heifers and their calves. That's about mid-May. That's ryegrass. We'd done cut the ryegrass off to make baleage. Come back, you can't see it, but there's poly wire right in here. So I moved them every day. All right. There's also Red River crabgrass in that field that most of our cows we run or manage. We own about 400 cows. We run and manage 250 on our property. A cooperator has another 150. But our cows are all fall calvers. We have like 17 that didn't breed back that I got on another farm because I had grass, but we grazed them off before weaning. That's just a good picture that my wife thought ought to be in there. So that's that same field where they were at. Right here is May the 16th. There's because Chris told us to do clover. We didn't frost seed that. It got to be late in the year, like 1st of March. So we went in and just drilled that clover in, but had a good stand to come up. Right there on the left, June 18th, that's some Quick and Big Spreader 19. That's a forage type crabgrass. And then 32 days later, that's it. On the right side, I'd strip grazed that, and I went this way. This year I plan on going this way. But that litter there is ryegrass where we drilled over the top of it. But I should have got them on that before I did. I don't know. I got to do a better job about grazing and getting on forage earlier than letting it get away from me. Right there, that's a group of heifers that weaning. We'll segregate our calves. We'll put the steers one way, heifers go another way. That's Red River crabgrass there in that bottom that they're in. But that's the same way. That tall, like brown looking, is ryegrass that had just come back up and seeded out. But there had been a poly wire down through there. And then so I give them just from there to there. That picture there, my best friend, he bought a farm, and when he bought it, and I went down there and looked at it, and he said, something about putting cows on it. There had the good hemp market, in Kentucky, and it did so well, and they had hemp in that field. That was a joke. You can laugh. It was a joke for that family, but anyway. So I go down there and look at it, and he says, does everybody's farm have this many rocks on it? And not just this field, but even the pasture fields in behind it. And I said, yeah, it does. And he said, well, I don't notice them. It had been continuously grazed, and it looked a whole lot like this floor in here. When you take a rock that big and lay it on this floor, it's not hard to see. But it's took about 4 years. But managing time on that farm, it's unreal. And he's not a farmer, but it excites him to see what's being done on his property. And he will talk to people about this. And he's like, I can't explain all the details to you, because a lot of people, when you go to doing things different than the way somebody's always done it, they'll tell you that won't work. Or they'll tell you you're crazy. So what? It works. Me putting the time and effort into that, me being excited over that, me getting down on my knees and digging back and seeing if I can find an earthworm, or kicking a cow patty over to see if there's a dung beetle, or, looking at the ground. I don't know. Back to unrolling that hay. So, this last Saturday, I went and I was getting ready to go to Florida. So, part of the cattle, I set out enough hay to get me through till I got back. I fed some Wednesday evening when we flew back in. Got up and fed the rest of them yesterday. And part of them still got on grass. And that's a wonderful thing, because for every day that I don't have to feed, just say you had a group of 90 cows, and say they're 1,200 pounders, they'll eat a 5x5 roll of hay, a power wheel, a day. So they'd eat, every 30 will eat a 5x5 roll a day. So in 30 days, those would eat 90 rolls. So 90 cows would eat 90 rolls. Well, if hay's $50 a row, that's $4,500 in a month. That's a big deal. And all those days of grazing, you're not burning 0.23 gallon of fuel. A four-wheeler don't require that much. But my grandson, 5-year-old, and I was moving some cows one day onto new grass. And for whatever reason, they weren't right there where we were. And I called them, or I guess I pulled a gate back to let them go in. And I told him, I said, watch when they go from where they've been to that new grass. And they just stop, and they come running up through there. And right when they got to it, their heads just went to the ground. I was 49-year-old. I'm 51 now. I was 49-year-old, and I heard Jim Garris or Chris or Ray, somebody talking about a fescue plant and it recovering and it growing up to a point, like you see the leaf and it be at a point, and we shouldn't be putting our cattle on it until it got that. I told that 5-year-old that. Well, last Saturday, my 5-year-old, my 2-year-old, my son-in-law, and myself are all in the cab of a tractor. And I go unroll 2 rows of hay. And I'm talking to my son-in-law about this, and my 5-year-old, he said, yeah, Pa, he said, and tell him about that grass when it grows to a point. Well, my son-in-law, he didn't have a clue. But we need to teach these kids, and I went one day to move those cows. I put up poly wire, and we're going back in there, and I asked the 2-year-old, I said, Harlan, I said, when you grow up, do you want to be a farmer? He said, nope. I said, well, I said, Jace, when you grow up, do you want to farm? He said, maybe. And I told my wife, I said, I don't know about all this. But anyway, I went and I left them 2 in the truck, left the 5-year-old in charge of the 2-year-old, and you understand how that went. A major meltdown, because all the 5-year-old heard is I'm in charge. I left the truck running because it was cold, and I cut the wheels toward the barn. That way, if they did jerk it in gear, it'd just hit the barn. But I get back in there, and I go to move them, and here come all these cows running because they're going on new grass, and it tickled them to death. I believe that's how we get them involved, and it carries on. When the cows get out Friday evening at 7 o'clock, don't go get them and make them go with you. But get them excited about this. There's no better life. And as I shared at the American Forage and Grassland thing, I've got the best 2 jobs in the world. I really do. I preach and I farm. So I get to feed people spiritually and physically. And I love every minute of it, and I love those that I get to do it with. And I'm forever grateful for that. And as we go about this day after day, it can get you down sometimes. And, like thinking about it or overthinking, well, I don't want to do this, or I don't know. When I put these slides together, and you go back and look at those pictures, and you see change that you make on a place, you notice a spot of dew on that crabgrass plant in May, in June. And it reminds me, I was studying here a while back, talking about perseverance and patience. Nobody may pat you on the back or tell you they're proud of you or doing a good job. One time there was this missionary couple, been overseas for 50 years spreading the gospel. And on the way home, they got 2 suitcases that has everything they have in it. As you know, many missionaries are supported from people over here. On the plane with them is a rock band. They get back to the airport and they go to luggage claim, and as they're standing there, the husband's got big tears comes up in his eyes. And the wife says, what's wrong? He said, 50 years we give of our lives in service to the Lord. And he said, there's not one person in this airport to welcome us home. And said the terminal is full of people welcoming that rock band. And the wife leaned over and patted him on the back and kissed him on the cheek. And she said, but honey, we ain't home yet. And I can't wait to go home. Thank you.
Any questions for Jason?
I got one. So, just for my neighbor's hay that got down a little late and had some seeds in it, what's better to roll out seeds or not?
There is value in unrolling hay that's got seed in it. I've had that question. Okay, now, depending on, I think, the time of the year, you will say, this year, actually, on one of those farms, like I said, those cows are fall calving. I brought them down, I fed some hay in August and the first part of September to keep them off something. where I'd set those rows of hay out, you can go out there now and there's little seedlings that tall. Now they've not been on that, but they're there. That farm where I done rode all that hay, like what I've seen, your big impact, you may not have any through that next spring, but that coming fall, those plants will be stronger. What I unrolled was all second cutting. What I'm hoping is I'm going to go back over that and top seed with some clovers and some fescue and see what happens come about September. There's probably some mature Johnson grass seed in that too. And that's not a four-letter word to me because, anyway, I like it. But I'm going to say, and like we've been bale grazing some, and I heard that and I thought about it, and I went last year in probably a 2-acre plot, and I way overdid it, but I wasn't doing it from the aspect of, I was just moving hay rings around to where that animal would use less energy instead of wading mud that deep. Okay, so I'd have like the outside of the hay ring, they were all touching, but I kept moving them. About March, April, I thought, well, I'll have to go in there and put some crabgrass or something to be able to get something to graze off at. Now, I did have to bush it. You'll get crabgrass, but it would be the kind you want. But so I went in there and I bush hogged it a couple of times. Right now, there's probably a half a stand of the best looking fescue and orchard grass on that place. So my dad had bought another farm that had been continuously grazed, and I'll set out like 2 days worth of bales at a time. There's not the infrastructure there to move like temporary fencing, but I've made my way across it, and I'm excited to see what that does. But I think you'd be better, I don't know, they may, but unrolling a second cutting or whatever on something that's done established, and if you had weak spots, unrolling and the bale grazing. I think on that particular farm, I was bale grazing with spring cut hay because of the seed value that we have, because we're not very. But like this last year, well, we was all think about making hay. We sat around for 3 weeks trying to get in, and you could have rotated at least one time through, grazed your cattle, and.
All right, we probably need to move on. Ray, do you want to say a few things?
Let me say a couple